all mute? That would be great. And we will start with our flag pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And happy Flag Day to all of you. Let's also start with our four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? And I just wanted to say a short quote today for an invocation, something Benjamin Franklin said that I think embodies the spirit of Rotary. Well done is better than well said. There it is. Take a moment just to think about that. Doesn't that just sound like Rotary? That's a great one. All right. I have a history picture too. Kathy, are you able to pull that up? Poor thing, I keep bouncing you back and forth here. This is from 1982. And this is what the Rotary record used to look like. I met at the Midland Hills, of course. President Don Zabel was there. George Krinke started by leading with the Pledge of Allegiance. And you can just kind of look through and see if you recognize any names there. Harley Otto, Bob Rosine, of course, Peter Bellotta. I guess I didn't know Peter. So anyway, just fun to see how the
Peter actually worked for the Boy Scouts. He was the director of training and advancement.
Who was that?
Peter Bellotta, the name that you mentioned.
Oh, well, thank you. All right. Announcements. Does anybody have any announcements today? Lynn Scott and Mary Jo and I did some weeding out at the Y this past Saturday. I taught them all how to eat some weeds. We ate some lamb's quarters, which are really nutritious. Any other announcements? Well, let's go ahead and do some happy dollars. Who's got happy dollars today? Lauren, you look like
a $50. I'm just talked with my son, and we're planning to head over to Oshkosh and camp in the North 40 for a couple of nights and enjoy the air show.
That sounds wonderful.
Along that same lines, this weekend we're taking the kids to Wisconsin Dells, and they're super excited to go there. We went a couple of years ago and haven't had too many vacations since then, so loving this hot weather for them.
Very fun. Jan.
I have two happy dollars. First is we got to play 3 rounds of golf this weekend, which might have been a little bit hot to start with, but it was wonderful to get back out again and get on the course. And I'm right now riding a string of 10 straight days in our townhouse swimming pool, and plan on 11 later this afternoon.
Wow, congrats, way to go. Ted.
Yeah, I've got a couple of happy dollars. I was up there at the garden on Thursday weeding, and I dug out a shovel and spent 2 hours digging out these horrible looking, I don't know what they were, weeds with all kinds of prickers on it. And I never got one in my fingers.
I'll give a couple
extra. That's called buckthorn.
Is that what it was?
Sounds like it.
I think they were thistles.
No, it wasn't buckthorn.
We got a lot of thistles.
It was part of, yeah, some kind of a thistle.
Well, I'll give a couple happy dollars. Couldn't sleep Saturday night, so at 3 in the morning I woke up and I thought, well, maybe I'll just get some meat out of the freezer for supper that night. Freezer door was open. So that's not the happy part. The happy part was that for breakfast on Sunday morning, we had steak and chicken and bratwurst and liver. And so we got it all cooked up. All right, well, thank you all. Jenny, would you do the honors on your last week as president-elect to introduce our speakers for today?
Yes, and let me just say that it's been great in the president-elect role, and we'll next week Deb and I will pass the gavel, so it'll be really exciting. But today, super excited to introduce John Andrews. John has been not only involved in scouting, but also very involved in Rotary. He's been involved in Rotary for 26 years, first in Sioux Falls and now with the St. Paul Club, of which he also served as president. So he's a role model for me. And he was the past president of the Rotary Foundation as well. So very involved there. And then with scouting, he's been in scouting for 38 years. And he's been Scout Executive, CEO here with Northern Star and its predecessor for 21 years. So lots of engagement, very involved in the community. And we're excited for him to be here today to give us a little more update about scouting. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Getting my mute button pushed there. Well, it's a privilege to be with you, even on a screen. I've attended Roseville meetings a few times over the years, 21 years as a Scout executive here, but then I also worked with the Indian Head Council in the early 1990s. And so I've attended Roseville Rotary meetings way back, and I'm gonna see if I can share my screen. And there are several choices there. All right, am I up? You're able to see?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So these two guys, you'll surely recognize one and maybe recognize both. Paul Harris on the left and James West on the right. James West was the first Chief Scout Executive of the Boy Scouts through our national organization. And these two guys were actually good friends. And they traveled the United States together, starting Boy Scout councils through Rotary clubs. Rotary was founded, I think it was 1905, and then here locally, 1910. Club 9 and 10, the parent clubs here in Minnesota, were founded in the same month and the same year that the Boy Scouts was incorporated. And so as both organizations were getting their legs underneath them and spreading, like wildfire across the country, Paul Harris and James West were friends. And I think at one point of the about 600 Boy Scout councils across the country, more than 400 of them had been started by a Rotary club. And in fact, Sinclair Lewis said that the only difference between a Rotarian and a Boy Scout is that a Rotarian wears long pants. There was a lot of similarity and a lot of overlap. And Paul Harris was presented with the Silver Buffalo Award the very first year that it was made available. That's the highest volunteer recognition that can be presented by the Boy Scouts nationally. This is a photo that was, taken also about that same time. This photo was actually taken in May of 1911. And this is where I'm sitting right now at base camp. And this is Secretary Wheelock. He was the assistant to Governor Wauchope, and Joseph Wauchope was Eberhart. I'm getting two people mixed up, but Governor Eberhart was the president of the Boy Scouts in St. Paul at that time. And so Secretary Wheelock here is speaking, and that's why we have photos of our very first camp out. That water tower you might be able to see in the background is the Fort Snelling water tower at the time. And they're right by Cold Spring is where they're camping. And this was the very first summer camp. And we didn't even know it was held here at Fort Snelling until after we purchased base camp for our 100th anniversary. So we celebrated our 100th anniversary of being organized, including with the help of both Minneapolis and St. Paul Rotaries, in the case of our council as well. So because the governor was the council president, we had photography, lots of pictures of the event, which is pretty cool. This is the first building that we purchased at base camp on our 6 acres out here, which is now our headquarters. If you weren't aware, the Scout office in St. Paul was sold just prior to building the Leadership Center out here 3 years ago. And it's actually now apartment buildings. If you haven't been to Marshall and Western or driven by that intersection in the last couple of years. And so we moved out here and purchased the 1907 Cavalry Drill Hall. And it was our intent to no longer have offices at some point in time, but rather to only operate program facilities, and that every physical asset of the Northern Star Council would be leveraged for delivery on mission for young people, for delivery of program and impacting lives. And our board of directors, at the time of consolidating Minneapolis and St. Paul, in 2005, our vision statement was that we wanted to impact the lives of 100% of all children in our communities, that we aren't an organization who only cares about ourselves, only cares about our youth members, but we care about all kids, and the things that Scouts do are good for all kids. And so in that facility you see there, which of course we restored historically, we were the first historic reuse of a building at Fort Snelling. We turned it into this facility, and 80% of the 50,000 people a year that have used it since 2010 have not been Scouts. 85% of the users are kids on school field trips, kids in other youth organizations, Girl Scouts, YMCA, 4-H, and a whole host of community groups, adult and youth. But we also have, we've been the bar mitzvah capital of the Twin Cities. We have quinceaneras. We have various festivals having to do with different kinds of cultural groups within the cities, because it's a great big barn on the inside. So it's pretty flexible, pretty useful. And we're pretty proud of the fact that we went way above and beyond what we had to do as required by the National Historic District. And we opened up windows that had been bricked up for decades, and we rebuilt chimneys on the back side of that building, and did other things to properly restore that building that had been sitting vacant for 25 years. By the way, Jenny, holler at me if I start running long. You know my tendency to ramble. So the next project was to construct a leadership center. And we call it the Leadership Center not because of who works here or the fact that it's the headquarters, but because we teach leadership skills. And so in the Team Building Center, which was first known as Base Camp, but now known as the Team Building Center, and in the Leadership Center, we give kids experiential learning, hands-on opportunities to learn how to be a strong member of a strong team, but also to have the skills through trial and error and learning to be a leader of a team. And then of course, the wisdom to know when to play which role. And if you can give that to children, then you can give the world to children, all children, no matter who they are or where they come from. So this was our big project. What the construction you see there is about 4 years ago. And it's a $40,000, well, I wish it was $40,000, 40,000 square foot leadership center, which does act as our administrative headquarters, but also has large meeting rooms. So I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this space over here left of the big climbing tower is a room for up to 150 people. And then we've got rooms in the center of the lit up part of the building that can hold up to 100 people, and then several smaller rooms. And so we have lots of different kinds of community groups that come through. People looking for a meeting place, people that want to be by the airport or by the historic fort. And now that the visitor center is gone at Fort Snelling, they had an amphitheater for 250 people and other rooms. That's all gone now. And so, you know, we are a little bit more of a popular spot. And again, that's our vision statement. We want to be a part of the community, the fabric of the community, caring for all young people in partnership with Rotary and education and chartering organizations, American Legions, churches, PTAs, you name it. That's basically the movement of scouting. Here's another view of both buildings at night. It's a pretty neat spot and a pretty exciting spot because of just the nature of the confluence out here. Bodote, the historic fort, the birthplace of the Dakota people, the Sibley House, bike trails, light rail 300 yards away, 14,000 acres of wild area around us. You can walk to the banks of the Mississippi River or the Minnesota River in 10 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. Here's a fireplace scene. We wanted the building to convey the fun and adventure of scouting and of the out of doors. We believe the out of doors today is just as vital as it ever was for young people as a classroom. And so this on the right is a courtyard that the building wraps around. And we even have a wild turkey friend who's here pretty much every day. And there's a fire pit and a statue of Ohiesa, a Dakota man that I could say a little bit, well, we could give it an entire presentation on Ohiesa. But it's a real wood fireplace, and there's an Ojibwe hunter style canoe, and then we've got Voyageur canoes in the leadership lab. And you need to come here for a meeting or a rotation day. And you never know who shows up. There are the Vulcans. They showed up one winter afternoon without notice and took the place over. And then another day I walked in and there was planet Earth and the moon right in front of the fireplace. So that's a function of the fact that this is a community gathering place. So into perhaps the meat of a conversation that might lead to more questions or that might revolve around some of the questions that you already had. You know, as I think about the last 20 years of making presentations to various Rotary clubs, there have been several different topics. And starting back in 2000, when I first succeeded Ron Filippo as the Scout Executive for Indian Head, the Supreme Court decision had just been made that said that Scouting was a private organization and could still make its own rules about, you know, whether an atheist could be a member or whether a girl could be a member or whether a gay person could be a member. And so our council took the position at that time that we believed that everyone needed to exhibit appropriate behavior in scouting, no matter what their sexual orientation was. We took the position that scouting is a program for children and is therefore not a program about sexuality, and that a good person is who we were looking for. And so we just asked everyone to exhibit appropriate behavior. That was somewhat at odds with the national policy, but honestly, it was just common sense. And that's where the national policy finally wound up. But boy, there were lots of conversations and lots of debate and lots of newspaper headlines. And we all know, you know, the change that has occurred over the last 20 years. In 2007, in 2005, we consolidated with Minneapolis, and I'm speaking we because I was the Scout Executive in St. Paul at the time. And that was the largest merger in BSA history. And really was a 1 + 1 = 3 consolidation. So that also led to a lot of Rotary presentations and other kinds of talks. We were the first large nonprofit after the United Way, or one of the very first, to consolidate Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so we were actually called upon by a lot of other nonprofit organizations to come and talk to them about what it meant and what to avoid and what to take advantage of. In 2007, we purchased the first portion here of Base Camp and wanted to create an urban camp where we could build a bridge to our other 7 camps, 7,000 acres of beautiful outdoor classroom and wild area in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And Base Camp was intended to be more accessible to kids in the core city that sometimes were scared when they would go to our other camps. It was dark, they didn't know what was in those woods. And here at Base Camp, there's ambient city light, there's planes flying overhead, and they built a camp for us down in the Fort Snelling State Park, the first time they had done that, and had an overnight camping area that we still utilize today. 2015, The national BSA policy changes came along, having to do with sexual orientation in particular, adopting the model of appropriate behavior by all. And base camp, was then designated as our headquarters, and that we were going to build a service center here, and we began the process of planning for it, raising funds in a capital campaign to build the leadership center that I showed you pictures of earlier, and sold the other 2 properties in Golden Valley and St. Paul. 2018, as you are almost certainly aware, girls began to come into scouting, which certainly has an impact on your brand identity. Are you the Boy Scouts of America or what? And then, market-driven strategies, trying to be a little smarter about what it is that the community needs today, even knowing that the foundational elements of our program are still strong and valid. 2019, we began to have conversations about youth safety and whether or not scouting was a safe place for children, particularly with regard to sexual predators. Minnesota suspended its statute of limitations, allowing claims from decades and decades ago, and questions about institutional responsibility and wrongdoing versus stewardship and care. All of those things began to be asked in the larger media about not only churches, but about scouting. And then, of course, we come into 2020 and 2021, and COVID-19 has been large in everyone's life and large in schools, which has had a big impact on our ability to serve children, because there just hasn't been a better place to recruit, at least not stronger. We have many ways in which we recruit, but nothing as strong as recruiting in schools. Focusing on safety for a minute, this is rather odd slide, and if you're able to see it in the far bottom right corner, there's 1 red dot and 9,999 blue dots. And this is just a quick infographic that's designed to provide context that you may not hear otherwise. And this has to do with how many people made a claim against Northern Star Council when Minnesota opened its statute of limitations for child sexual abuse claims. The 9,999 dots are representative of about 1.3 million children that we have served in scouting locally since 1910. And that red dot, actually 6/10 of that red dot, is the number of people that have made a claim of harm against us. So 1 child, of course, is too many. And we must be responsible for them, in real time, and responsible for them looking backwards in terms of taking responsibility for what our organization could or couldn't do and did or didn't do. However, that's a record of safety that you're looking at right there. And in fact, 10% of all of those blue dots would be red if we were looking at the number of children, the percentage of children in Minnesota today who report having experienced actual sexual abuse. It's a much bigger problem than people want to talk about. The organizational identity that I spoke of, and the connection to serving girls. Are you the Boy Scouts or what are you? Is Girl Scouts for girls, Boy Scouts for boys? The Girl Scouts of the USA is one of the only countries in the world where the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts are completely separate. Many other countries, they're either partnered or the same. And in 1910, the Boy Scouts of America started a girls organization that was going to be a partner organization, and it was called Campfire Girls. And that was the girls program, and they just chose the wrong name. A few years later, the Girl Scouts came along, had a great curriculum. Juliet Gordon Lowe in Savannah, Georgia. The Boy Scouts sued her for years to try to get her to stop using that name, weren't successful at doing it, and the 2 organizations have, at best, partnered on projects ever since. And so what we experienced was that our families, more and more, were saying the organizational identity of Boy Scouts largely serving boys. We had been serving girls in some programs since 1971. They said, if we want this program for our son, and then we want this program for our daughter. And so it was really driven by families saying, we're looking for a one-stop shop. And the 2 organizations are great, but they are different and they do different things. And we want some equity for our daughters. So we are still called the Boy Scouts of America, at least right now. The program for boys and girls of Boy Scout age, which is largely 11 and up, is now called Scouts BSA. It's still the Boy Scouts of America for now, but the program itself is Scouts BSA. And then the younger group are still Cub Scouts. And then we have Venturing and Exploring, which have been co-ed since 1971. Membership organizations are largely struggling. I don't know exactly what the metrics are for the Roseville Rotary Club, but I know them pretty well for the St. Paul Rotary Club, and I'm familiar with the counts. Membership organizations in America generally reached their zenith when all those men and women came back from World War II and invested in community that they had worked so hard to save in their country. And so they and their children, that's when we reached our high point market share in the scouting organization was 1971, as the children of that greatest generation became of scout age. Since then, we've been trying not to boil like a frog, but to be cognizant of the fact that the world is changing. And while how we measure success may or may not be just raw numbers, that we have to be relevant. We have to have a value proposition that makes a difference, and that continues to change lives and transform lives with things that kids can't find anywhere else. And so we believe we do, but there are things that come along, like partnering with education in a time of COVID, that can really make you wonder, what does the future hold? So that's our focus. We need to keep scouting strong. We need to keep lots of organizations and Rotary or our churches or other kinds of things where one generation can transfer its values to the next generation and help children to gain life skills and understand how to be our successors one day. That's the community, all across the community, being focused on young people and building teams in the Team Building Center and leaders in the Leadership Center. And you can certainly be very, very proud, both as Roseville Rotarians, but as citizens of what you and your fellow Rotarians have done to keep scouting strong. The bankruptcy, I'll leave that to questions that you may have. We can sure talk about it, but we're lucky that this council is going to be able to emerge. I'm confident that we're going to be able to emerge from what's happening with the national organization and the national bankruptcy. And I think of Terry and Dave Gilberstadt and Hugh Schilling. Hugh had made a gift, and Terry and Dave made sure that it played out in a way that keeps scouting strong, as we miss Hugh, but are so proud of what he wanted to accomplish for young people in lots of different ways and lots of community institutions. Sandy Craighead and Don and the work that they've done. Bob and Joyce Rosine, gone now. We saw their names on that newsletter from 1992. Roland Wilsey, Patty Dalen, past president of your club, longtime staff member for us. So again, whether you're wearing long pants or short pants, we're all doing the same work, and we're just so grateful and proud of what Rotary has done for scouting. Are there questions, ideas, things you'd like to share?
Thank you very much. If you guys have a question, would you please raise your hand, or yeah, Tom.
John, talk a little bit about what scouting is doing now with diversity and inclusivity.
Yep, happy to. It's always been, very, very important to us. The first African-American troop in St. Paul came in 1911. And, the world was a little different back then, but there was an African-American troop led by Charles Miller in St. Paul, and he had worked with young people in his community through baseball for years. So from day one, we've certainly had a focus on serving all children. The environment that you do it in has evolved over time. I can remember when I worked for the Scouts in St. Louis, hearing about Lion's Den, which was a segregated scout camp. So, things have changed over time. We currently serve within 2.1 percentage points representative populations across 4 major ethnic groups. And so whether it's Southeast Asian, African American, Latino, or Caucasian, we're within 2.1 percentage points. That number ebbs and flows. The United Way for the last 20 years had increasingly really only funded low income programs. And so they were about $1 million in funding just 10 years ago for us. That's gone now. As the United Way has become much smaller, they've really focused not so much on the larger organizations that they believed would be able to survive on their own. And so all of the large youth serving organizations, the 5 large ones that we were one of, no longer receive United Way funding. That has had an impact on us because there's also a sustainability and a self-generated revenue component to making strategic decisions about where Northern Star Scouting will invest its resources in the community's resources. And for example, in low-income communities, which are often communities of color, we would have to hire leaders when you're talking about single parents working 2 or 3 jobs, or even a culture. In the Hmong culture, to offer to help your scout leader is like offering to help a teacher teach, and it's seen as an insult. And so the way in which they work together is different than the way in which a scout troop is organized. And so we have to make adaptations. And of course, there's also the costs of uniforms and summer camps and handbooks that, you know, we have to subsidize. So we're still doing our best there. We're still doing our best to have cultural competence. We're doing our best to help our volunteers to have some, you know, diversity and equity and inclusion skills and knowledge. We run very strong summer camps, and those camp staff's about 500 young people that work at our camps through the course of the summer, which, by the way, we did run in COVID last year. We were the only ones in this entire region that ran summer camps. And we served 4,000 kids, which was only about 1/3 of our normal attendance, but we had 0 cases of COVID last summer. So we're pretty proud of the fact that we showed kids how to get out there and be smart and be safe, but to not hide from it unless there was good reason to. Long answer to a short question. Sorry about that.
Other questions? Mary Jo?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much, John. Mary Jo McGuire, I was a campfire girl, so I never knew that. I mean, you know, I think you just do whatever is in your area, you know, whatever you have scouts. My brothers were all in Boy Scouts and I was in campfire. So I don't know if back then they were the same organization. I'm trying to remember what year you said they went off on their own.
Yeah,
But,
late teens, the late 19 teens, where they
yeah, okay.
YMCA, and then his wife was key to, and the wives of Daniel Carter Beard and Ernest Thompson Seton and James West, they were all the first board members of Campfire.
Wow. So could you just explain a little bit more? I know you talked a little bit about this. So that's a whole nother, now it's a different organization and they do their thing. And but now there's Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, and there's girls that can be a part of Boy Scouts. So could you talk, just give them a little more clarity on what the Girl Scouts are, not the girls that are in Boy Scouts, but the Girl Scouts. What that difference is, or what, you know, when I don't know which I would have joined now if I had the option.
Sure.
But,
yeah. And, you know, obviously I can't speak for the Girl Scouts, but
right. Yeah.
it's pretty clear that they intend to, and so far are maintaining their single gender identity.
Okay.
And they want to be a program for girls and for girls only, which is great as far as I'm concerned. Both of us individually, independently, serve less than 10% of available youth. There's lots of room for good organizations with good curriculum and good program strategies to be able to work together and help each other, and then to let families and children decide which organization they want to be a part of. It's been interesting. We serve about 15% of our Cub Scouts so far are girls, and about 20% of our Scouts BSA children are girls. And the girls have their girls troop, and then the boys are in a boys troop, but they do a lot of things closely together. So there's some separate leadership. They can even share a campsite at summer camp. They're going to be in different parts of the campsite. And there's going to be men and women who are leaders, of each. And so we've had girls who join the Scouts BSA program who retain or join Girl Scouts too. And they're just looking for different program experiences.
Well, I really appreciate that, John, and just thank you so much for all of your work, and good job on being inclusive earlier on, showing an example for the national. I think that's just great. And I know I just went to an Eagle Scout ceremony. Oh my goodness, they are so impressive. You're just in tears for the great work that these kids do and the great character that this develops. So I think it's just a great program, and thank you for all your work.
Other questions?
Me,
Lynn.
hi, thank you so much. You know what, I work with people with disabilities, and when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we always forget people with disabilities. So please talk about people with disabilities. And I know we lost a champion in that area, a very dear friend of mine, Sandy Kloss.
Yes, yeah, that was tough. She had been a big champion, and Sandy, at her funeral, they said that she was effectively diplomatic. I actually have it here in my.
Yes, I was there.
Yeah, but it was wonderful. The priest spoke about her and charmingly direct, or something like that.
Yes. He was the St. John's guy. Yeah.
And but yes, she talked about the old boys club that existed when she joined the board of the Boy Scouts back in the late 1980s, and how she took them on to make sure that they understood the importance of serving all people, including those with cognitive or physical disabilities. And she was a champion in that area, of course, all of her life, as her family is. But we're very proud of our record there as well. We have something we call the Polaris District, where we adapt our programs, adapt our facilities. We serve children who are in residential facilities who often don't see a lot of outside people in their lives. We work with either their staff or our own volunteer corps to deliver programs for all young people. And we serve several thousand children in our Polaris District. And if you want to, speaking of that Eagle ceremony, which of course they are always emotional because you understand the importance of what's happened and is happening for those young people. Try going to one for an 80-year-old man whose cognitive age is 9 and has worked for decades and earned the Eagle Scout rank. That'll knock you down.
I work with Stu West and support Stu West, who got his Eagle at 40. So very amazing. Thank you.
John,
Lynn, did you hear the part about being able to get a wheelchair up to the, what did you call it, the highest part of the?
Yeah, the high ropes course. Yeah, in our team building center.
Lauren and I are going to do that. So.
Yeah, we get we try to remove all those obstacles, and having someone who has very little use of their upper body watching them shoot a bow and arrow for the first time is pretty special.
Wow. Julie, did you have a question? Al.
Yes, John. As a young child, my daughter was a bluebird, and is that any connection, or how does that fit in with Boy Scouts? Because I think it was in her senior years in high school that I think it was true that she was kind of attached to some Boy Scout organization on a medical basis. So she used to spend time at North Memorial Hospital and down to Mayo Clinic and so forth. So what is the connection there?
Yeah, so if it's the connection that I'm thinking of, Bluebirds was one of the younger age groups in Campfire. And in fact, when Campfire went co-ed, which was, as I recall, about 1980, they called the boys Bluebirds too. But boys and girls were both Bluebirds at the entry level. What you're speaking about at North Memorial Hospital, it sounds like she was part of an Explorer post, and it was probably Emergency Services Explorer post, which is a Boy Scouts of America program. And so we serve several thousand young people here in our our coverage territory of Western Wisconsin and the strip across Minnesota, through exploring, where kids get hands-on experiences with vocations. So for example, police departments, fire departments, hospitals, accounting, any business you can think of. What a wonderful thing for a child to not, just read about it in an occupational brief, but instead to go into a workplace or into a manufacturing plant and see what it would be like to study and or pursue that as a career. And so that's been a big program. Even if your daughter didn't go into medicine, I bet she gained from it.
She did go into medicine, and I think a lot of that had an inspiration for her to do that. Down at Mayo, she observed from up on the observation area a back surgery on a person, and I think that spurred her to go into medicine.
One quick one. Great niece got her gold award at age 15 in Northern Illinois. So, and her seed money for her project came from Libertyville Rotary. So, very special.
And that's, for those that don't know, that's the equivalent to the Eagle Scout Award, which can now be earned by girls. But my daughter earned her gold award as a Girl Scout, and I know firsthand it is the equivalent to the Eagle Scout rank.
It's beautiful.
Very cool.
This is Ted Johnson. I've got a question. John, thanks for a fascinating presentation. But also, what are Scouts doing with the issues of climate change, with all the interest of youth in that area too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, I would have to say things around the edges, as opposed to, becoming, a central advocacy. And, nothing wrong with that, but, I want to establish, right off the bat, when somebody asks about something like that, that it's probably pecking around the edges, which is okay. We want kids to gain, a pretty diverse set of experiences. There's 130 merit badges that have led most people over the course of the last 100 years that were in Scouts to find hobbies, if not a vocation, that stayed with them all their lives. And so climate change is pretty integrally tied into our environmental science merit badges, our soil and water conservation merit badges, lots of different learnings having to do with nature and ecology and sustainable ecosystems. We are engaged in a major project right now, planting trees. And there's some people who believe pretty strongly that if we were to just plant enough trees, that we'd be able to make a pretty heavy dent in, carbon loading. So I would say it's working around the edges and trying to let children turn the light bulb on over their own head and find passions that they want to pursue.
John, do you also want to just quickly mention juvenile diversion and talk a little bit about that program too?
Absolutely. We do a lot of things that people don't realize, but you tend to have this perception of, a Cub Scout in a blue uniform and probably a boy, or a Boy Scout, helping, his grandmother across the street or something. But we do lots of different kinds of things as we seek to have an impact and leverage the volunteer model. That's our core competency, is that for every young person in Scouting today, for every 3 young people in Scouting today, there's an adult registered volunteer who's giving an average of 20 hours a month of their time as a mentor and teacher. And the average Eagle Scout, by the time they've earned their award, they have fulfilled more than 800 different requirements and interacted with more than 200 different adult and young adult mentors. And so that's a big part of the transformational experience. The juvenile diversion program is different. It's a 10 or 12 week program that hopefully the kids never come back to again, because and in fact, 80% of them don't. And it has to do with kids who've gotten in trouble with the law. And there are a lot of juvenile diversion programs there, but we do have an 80% flip rate. 80% of kids who get in trouble as juveniles reoffend. We track for 5 years, and 80% of the kids who get in trouble do not reoffend. And they have to complete a program, several classes, work with their peers, their parents, and our staff. And we do that in cooperation with police departments, sheriff departments, even the Mall of America security, and serve several hundred young people a year, sometimes up over the 1,000 or even 1,500 mark. But with COVID, all of our programs have been a little smaller this past year.
John, talk about the financial health of the organization.
Well, money is the root of all good in an organization like this. It's what keeps the organization strong, and we've got a good volunteer board that makes sure that the fiduciary duty, of a volunteer board and the stewardship duty of doing what we're supposed to do with our donors' gifts is fulfilled. And we are the Scouts, and so we darn well better do it with integrity and do our best. And so, wherever your interest may lay, whether it's funding annual operations or doing something for the long term or helping to improve our camps. We had a $3 million gift from the FC and KB Anderson Foundation to help convert our facilities for families and girls. A lot of our facilities were, long-term, largely boy facilities. So that some of that capital infrastructure requires work if we're going to be able to welcome everyone and grow for those that are looking for this experience. So there's any number of ways to help. And, we haven't really talked much about the national organization being in bankruptcy. We've got a very strong safety record, but we are also going to be obligated to do whatever we can to help people who were harmed. At the same time that we take care of children in the future. We've got to try and balance those responsibilities. So the national organization is the debtor. We don't have any active litigation here in Minnesota, but all councils across the country, 253 of them today, separately incorporated franchisees, we are being asked to make a voluntary contribution to the emergence from bankruptcy. And our council will. We'll do it with dollars that have been gained on unrestricted investments over time, or unrestricted gifts. But we're going to be able to emerge and be sustainable and be stable and hopefully rebuild and replenish those funds and demonstrate that we are Scouts. We'll stand up for what's right.
John, a while back, I heard a rumor that there were virtually no Eagle Scouts that have ever been convicted of a felony. Is there any truth to that? Do you have any records about that?
No, we don't keep records. I know at one time, I think it was Marion Barry in Washington, D.C. claimed to be an Eagle Scout, and things didn't go so well for him. They had trouble finding the records that showed that he was an Eagle Scout, but I have found Eagle Scouts here locally that we didn't have a record of either. So it can happen. Kids are kids. Men and women are men and women. People can get in trouble in a hurry. So I wouldn't ever claim that, no Scout has ever been found, in juvenile detention or has gotten in trouble. But I do believe that when you say the Scout oath in law over and over and over, with your hand up in the air, that it's not just rote memorization. I believe there's an imprint that's made.
Can we have everyone on the screen raise your hand if you are a member of Scouts? Very cool. I love Scouts. I was a Scout and a leader all the way through my senior year in high school and stuff too. So I love Scouts.
Campfire count? I was in Campfire, but not
I was
Scouts.
in
I know.
Campfire. Yeah,
I was
in Campfire and Bluebirds also.
And Bluebird. I was a Bluebird in
Bluebird.
Campfire because they didn't have girls in Scouts back then. Yeah.
Campfire and Bluebird too.
All right.
I wanted to be a Scout, but 10 miles from town, it was too long of a walk to walk in for the meeting. So I never had that privilege. I did own a Boy Scout manual way back when I was in freshman in high school, and so much wanted to be a Scout, but I did not fit for that.
Say, John, Order of the Arrow played a big part in my scouting life back when back in the day. As a vigil member, as also a lodge chief, is Order of the Arrow still actively involved in scouting now?
Yes, very strong. We have, I think it's the second or third largest Order of the Arrow lodge by membership counts in the country. Still very, important program. The spirituality that comes, even for a young person that may not have a family that's active in a church, the spirituality that's gained through the Order of the Arrow and those experiences is, very, very meaningful. And that idea that you're elected by your peers and that chosen by your peers as one who exhibits, service above self and is willing to, stand up and be a leader when called upon or when needed. So very strong. The Native American component was a big part of that mysticism. And Ohiesa, who I mentioned earlier, I'm looking down right now at his statue in our courtyard. He was a Dakota man that was key to the founding of Scouting, whose father was commander of Fort Snelling, grandfather, and his other grandfather died in the internment camp at Fort Snelling. So he's got some pretty good credentials to be standing in our courtyard. And he wrote books and dedicated them to the Boy Scouts of America and the Campfire Girls, and gave them Dakota names that they could use for themselves, and said that white families needed to know how Native Americans raised their young people because there were important lessons to be gained. And so that's where a lot of the Native American connection in the Order of the Arrow came from. And today it's a lot harder to do that without being accused of cultural misappropriation or literally not doing a good job, with respecting the culture. And so that may change. There are a lot of third rails around us in the world today. And so the Native American piece, I think, is becoming a little less, but the outdoor component, the principles of service, citizen servant leadership, those things are all still a part of what we call our honor society, the Order of the Arrow.
John, we have one more question from Lynn Scott.
John, with your extensive history in Rotary as well, it seems to me that, and I know Rotary and Scouting have been doing a lot of things together, but it would seem like the whole vocational avenue of service would be a place where Scouting and Rotary could really continue to work together to the benefit of both organizations.
I 100% agree. And, I know that you've got overlaps, for example, with your taste fundraiser and the local troop, but the biggest impact would not just be from moral support and community support or even money. It would be from helping families get connected with the program. There are so many choices in the world today, and not all of them are educational, and not all of them are transformative. And the competition through different kinds of communication platforms and the difficulty with getting a paper flyer home from school. 70% of the young people who join the Scouting program each year joined because of a paper flyer that came home from school. It's just so much more meaningful than an email that contains 300 flyers that gets opened maybe a month later by the parent. And the open rate is just terrible. And think of all the low-income families that don't even have a computer at home. So the ways in which schools who are besieged and whose bandwidth is stretched, but the ways in which they can interact with our families to connect kids with important learning opportunities that complement the formal classroom learning, it's struggling right now. If there was a way, we've been trying for 4 years now to pass legislation that protects schools from litigation if they let the Scouting organization hand out flyers, but don't let the KKK hand out flyers. Literally, that's how the law is written right now, that under freedom of association, somebody can sue because they made a subjective decision about who a curriculum partner can be. That's just crazy.
John, we have one more question from Lynn Scott, and then we'll wrap up after that.
Sorry, Deb, I'm on a different device, and I was raising my hand in response to Lynn Megan's question that I was a Girl Scout. So I don't have a question. I would just thank John very much. This has been very informative. Thank you.
And John, just very inspirational. I appreciate everything that you're doing, and I'm grateful that you were able to be here today. Obviously, there was a lot of interest in what you had to say. So just so you know, we make donations to the Roseville Rotary Woods to honor our speakers. And so we thank you, and a contribution will be made there on your behalf. So next week is the big changeover And so we'll have kind of a year in review, and I'm gonna turn over the gavel to Jenny. So I hope you will all be here next week. Thank you very much for joining us, and the meeting is adjourned.